Africa and the FIFA World Cup, from outsiders to makers of history. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most exciting events and history of football. Welcome to BallAfrica, the podcast where the heartbeat of African football meets the global stage, showcasing the worth, the pride, the power, and the greatness of African football. Football in Africa is more than a sport. It is hope. It's identity. It's a cultural sense of belonging. It's pride wrapped around 90 minutes of drama and way beyond 90 minutes. And nowhere does that pride shine brighter than the biggest stage in world football, the FIFA World Cup. The FIFA World Cup, the greatest stage on earth for soccer, football, and Africa being part of it. Today's episode is a journey through history. From the days when African teams were ignored by global sports soccer football authorities, to the unforgettable moments when African players stunned the world with amazing performance skill. We will explore how Africa fought for the right to play at the World Cup, the pioneers who carried the continent's flag, the legendary players who changed the narrative, the records African teams have set at the World Cup, and what the future might hold for African football at this great stage of football. So, settle down. We're in for a ride because today we will tell the story of Africa's road to the World Cup. I'll start with the first segment. The first segment of this podcast will talk about some of the early years, when Africa was not even invited to the World Cup. When the first FIFA World Cup took place in 1930 in Montevideo in Uruguay, with all matches played at the Estadio Centenario. Africa was not represented. Africa wasn't there. Africa wasn't part of the table. Like zip, zip, zip. Africa wasn't. In fact, no African nation participated in the first 7 World Cups. 7 World Cups. Montevideo in 1930 to 1960 in Chile. Why? Because global football was dominated by Europe and South America. FIFA, the governing body, Fédération Internationale de Football Association, allocated qualification slots mostly to Europe and to South American teams. Africa was simply grouped in broader regions, often forced to compete against stronger European teams for just a single spot or a single place. The competition was ruthless. This made it way too hard and difficult for an African team to qualify for the World Cup. It was actually really just a European and a South American business. It was a European and South American affair that just belonged to them. For decades, African football federations felt that the system was unfair, that the system was unjust, and that it did not make logical sense for sports that's so global like football. And they were right. The system was a problem. This brings us to the second part. So there needed to be a transition. And what was the plan? The 1966 boycott. Africa takes a stand. Abdel Salam Mustafa Al-Abdel Aziz, one of the most important turning points in African football, made history because he led Africa to a boycott in 1966. At that time, FIFA allocated just one qualifying spot, shared between Africa, Asia, and Oceania. One spot, 3 continents. So whacked indeed, the audacity of it. That meant an entire continent had almost no real path to the tournament, and 3 continents had no real path to the tournament. The response, the reaction, the decision, African nations came together, they united. It was a very powerful political move, a strong political statement. It was a strong message. It was a tone that was set. And it worked because it got the listening ears. After that boycott, FIFA finally granted Africa its own guaranteed spot, beginning with the 1970 FIFA World Cup. This was the first World Cup held in North America, and Mexico was the host nation. Africa was granted one spot into this World Cup. That moment changed everything. The history of African football started to see a twist. There was a new page that was opened. This was a pivot. This brought Africa's first true representative to the World Cup. The first African nation to qualify under the new system was the Moroccan national football team in 1970. That's the first African team that made it to the World Cup. Playing in Mexico, Morocco became the continent's pioneer. Despite losing 2 group games, they succeeded to pull a 1-1 draw against Bulgaria. The first African team participating in the World Cup pulls a draw against Bulgaria. They didn't win the tournament, but they made history. That draw was very symbolic. It shared that Africa had quality. A glorious moment for an entire continent, a pride. The participation opened the door for every African team that would follow. A dream is born for African football. The rise begins. Africa shocks the world. African teams soon began proving they belong. They are part of this global festivity. One of the earliest shocks came in 1978 at the 1978 FIFA World Cup. The Tunisian national football team defeated the Mexican national team by 3-1, Africa's first victory at the World Cup. It was Africa's first ever World Cup victory that brought pride and joy to the continent. Another big milestone, 8 years after. The message here is, yes, we can. Indeed, we can. And suddenly, the world realized something important. African football was not just participation anymore. African football means business. African football is here to belong. It was competing like all other football. Legends of African World Cup moments came overnight. Over the years, African teams have produced unforgettable performances at the World Cup. By 1990, Africa now had 3 seats at the World Cup. Cameroon in 1990 had the national team that stunned the World Cup. Led by the legendary Roger Milla, Cameroon defeated the defending champions, the mighty Diego Maradona's Argentina national team, in the opening match. This was a glorious moment. This sent the world into shock and frenzy. A small Central African team immediately gained millions and millions and millions of supporters worldwide, across borders, global admiration. Milla, Roger Milla, the legend, dancing by the corner flag after scoring goals became one of the most iconic images in World Cup history. The same gesture is repeated today by so many players, including Brazil's great Vinicius Jr. By the way, he acknowledges his roots as Cameroonian. His DNA tests to be Cameroonian. Now we understand why Vinny can do the dance. It's in the blood. Cameroon reached the quarterfinals, the best result by an African team at that time at the World Cup. Their coach, Valeri Nepomniachtchi, helped organize a fearless team of 90% amateur players that played mostly in Cameroon clubs nobody ever heard about, no name, very few professionals, which changed perceptions, the perception of African football forever. A legacy was created. The team's performance changed how we saw football and how Africa gets involved in football on the continent. And this gave Africa an additional spot at the World Cup. Senegal in 2002. After the 2002 FIFA World Cup, another shock arrived, another milestone for Africa. The Senegalese national team defeated the world champions, France, in the tournament opener. Another great stunner. Africa makes history at an open match of the World Cup. It sent waves of shock again across the continent, across the world. The winning goal came from Papa Bouba Diop. Senegal, led by coach Bruno Metsu, of French origin, reached the quarterfinals in their first ever World Cup participation. This was the first time Senegal was at the World Cup. In 2010, made history at the FIFA World Cup. They were the closest to making it to the semifinals. This was history. This World Cup, which was hosted in South Africa, that was one on the motherland, with a great, tremendous opener goal from South Africa's Sipiwe Chabalala against Mexico, led by players like Asamoah Gyan, Sule Montari. Ghana reached the quarterfinals. In the final minute of extra time against Uruguay national team, Luis Suarez caught the ball with his hand and, of course, got a red card, and Ghana was awarded a penalty. Added time on the 90 minutes. If Ghana scores, they become the first African country, African football team to make the World Cup semifinals. Superstar Asamoah Gyan hit the crossbar, and that pushed the game into 30 minutes of prolongation. Football can be cruel. The distance between the first African team making it to the semifinals was the crossbar, inches. But Ghana had made the continent extremely proud, though they lost in the penalty shootouts. We fast forward to 2022, breaking the barrier of history. History was finally made. The Moroccan national team became the first ever African country to reach the semifinals of a FIFA World Cup. In incredible style, Morocco was amazing. Led by its head coach, Wali Regragui, Morocco defeated giants like Spain, Portugal, players like Achraf Hakimi, Hakim Ziyech, Sofiane Amrabat, and one of the greatest goalkeepers of all time in Africa, Yassine Bono, became global heroes. It was the greatest of all by an African team. Now, did you know? This is our Did You Know segment. African players and the World Cup. Let's go through that and see it. Did you know? Roger Milla was the oldest player to score in the FIFA World Cup at the age of 42 years and 39 days old when he scored against Russia at the 1994 World Cup on June 28, 1994. Did you know that Samuel Eto'o and Rigobert Song have the most World Cup participations by an African player? And they have been at the World Cup at 4 different continent World Cup tournaments. Did you know that Didier Drogba, the Ivorian captain who carried a generation on his back, also ended a civil war in his country in Côte d'Ivoire? Did you know that the magician Jay-Jay Okocha, Nigerian magician known for dazzling skills, and who is still my current top player of all time, and is a legend? Did you know Abedi Pele, Ghanaian playmaker who inspired a generation and pushed his 2 boys, Jordan and Andre Ayew, to become great players and play for the Ghanaian national team? Did you know that George Weah, Africa's only Ballon d'Or winner, though Liberia never reached the World Cup during his era, has also been the former president, and his son, Timothy Weah, who plays for Olympique Lyonnais, is also a striker for the United States national team. These players have elevated the level of African football to a global stage. Now let's talk about how African teams qualify for the World Cup. We always see teams come up, nobody understands the process. What does it take to make it to the World Cup? Historically, the path to the World Cup for African teams is one that is tough. It's probably one of the toughest in the world, actually. if not the toughest. Under CAF, which is the the Confederation of African Football, there is a qualification system. Over 54 countries compete to qualify for different spots at the World Cup. Teams go through group stages. The best teams advance to a two-leg playoff round. Only a handful of teams do qualify for the World Cup. In prior World Cups, we've seen spot allocations go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. For the 2022 FIFA World Cup, Africa had 5 representatives, but starting with the 2026 FIFA World Cup, Africa now has 9 representatives. From 0 in 1963 to 9 representatives currently in 2026. This is largely due to the expansion of the number of participation teams from 32 to 48. Special kudos to Gianni Infantino for making this happen and expanding. Hopefully, this is going to reshape how global football. Let's look at some stats and records. We're going to keep this real quick and look at some very fascinating African World Cup statistics. Best African finish, Morocco. Morocco finished best in 2022. They were at the semifinals. The quarterfinalists, Cameroon in 1990, Senegal in 2002, Ghana in 2010. Oldest goal scorer at the World Cup is Roger Milla at the age of 42. Most World Cup appearances by an African player is Rigobert Song, who was the captain of the Cameroon Indomitable Lions. The most goals scored by an African player at the World Cup, 6 goals scored by Asamoah Gyan of Ghana. These records highlight Africa's growing influence on the global stage and the strength and power that Africa has as a football powerhouse. The stakeholders behind the progress of Africa's rise in world football, was not only the players, administrators, and institutions played a critical role in Africa's growth in the history of Africa's participation at the World Cup. The Confederation of African Football fought for fair representation. Visionary leaders pushed FIFA to recognize Africa's potential. Kwame Nkrumah, former president of Ghana, and Ohene Njang of Ghana as well. Dr. Patrice Motsepe, current president of CAF from South Africa. Issa Hayatou, former president of CAF from Cameroon of late, may his soul rest in peace. George Weah, former president of Liberia. Danny Jordan, South Africa's CEO for the South African World Cup. Current FIFA president Gianni Infantino have all played amazing roles in pushing for Africa to be at the forefront and showcase itself as a powerhouse at the FIFA World Cup. Today, African players dominate a lot of leagues in Europe. This is what it's all about, and it shows the glory that Africa represents as far as football goes. The takeaway from this history is from being excluded to boycott and protest to produce semi-finalists, quarterfinalists on the biggest stage. Africa's World Cup story is one of resilience, and the journey is far from over. With more qualification spots coming in 2026 in the United States FIFA World Cup, the chances of seeing an African team reach the finals are stronger than ever. Maybe even lift the trophy one day. Why not? It's not impossible anymore. All these players play in Europe, they play under the same conditions. And when that day comes, it will be a culmination of decades of struggle, talent, grind, and belief. Thank you for joining me today on BallAfrica, where we tell the stories that shape African football. If you enjoyed this episode of our podcast, BallAfrica, be sure to follow, subscribe, and share the podcast with fellow football lovers around you and around the world. We are on TikTok, Spotify, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. Be sure to subscribe to our channels on any of these platforms if that's where you're on, and this would give you access to more content about African stories being told by Africans, because African football is not just part of the global game. It is shaping its future in the global game. Until next time, keep your eyes on the ball, rolling, and your heart in the game. This is BallAfrica. Ciao.